Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining us on our debut PepTalk live stream. Today, we're going to be discussing the stats and the data behind the Great Resignation. And just while we're getting set up here, if there's anybody viewing, could you... Oh, there isn't anyone viewing yet. Okay, well, I'm going to bring in our two speakers and we can get straight into it. Firstly, I would like to introduce Niall O'Carroll, who's Chief of Global Partnerships for PepTalk. Niall, welcome today, and I know you're going to introduce Martina.
Yeah, thanks, Gus. Good to be on. It's nice to be trying out a new and different platform and way to communicate. Really fortunate to have Martina Akerlund on with us today. Martina is a woman with a wealth of experience and over 20 years in the financial world, and then currently CEO of a gaming tech company in Sweden, and an all-around good egg. And we're looking forward to having the chats. Martina, welcome aboard.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Niall, and I'm so happy to be here. It's such an interesting topic that you can discuss for hours.
Yeah,
we'll try not to.
Yes, we'll do our best.
So just by way of introduction to PepTalk, PepTalk is a team engagement and action platform specifically designed to help people in the hybrid world of work, for managers and leaders to get the most out of their teams and their teams to feel connected in the new world of work. And obviously that's quite important today because we are dealing with the Great Resignation, which is what we're here to talk about. The Great Resignation kind of popped into people's consciousness probably around March last year. I know the first piece of research that I saw was from Microsoft, the World Trending Index, and they talked about how there was going to be 40% of the global workforce potentially changing job in the next 12 months. And I suppose what we want to talk about today is whether that's actually happened, whether it's come to pass. So the short answer is it definitely has in some way, shape or form impacted. I'm not sure that we'd call it the Great Resignation. I'll ask Niall and Martina what they think just yet. So what this chart is I'm showing on the screen is resignations in the States for the year 2021 compared to the previous maybe 20 odd years back to about 2001. Okay, so you can see quite clearly the orange line is far above the other years. And what we're averaging here in the States is about 4.5 million people quitting their job every month. It's significantly higher than previous years, but if this trend continued at about 4.5 million, it would effectively equate to a third of the US workforce quitting their job in the next 12 months. So while that's not quite at the 40% level, it is significant in that it's higher than previous years and it's a third of the workforce looking to change job. And we know that they want to change because this is the unemployment figures for the States. And you can see that unemployment is actually falling. So people are changing job. It's not that they're being laid off or opting out of work because of what's going on. They are actually changing job. Now, it's a little bit different for Europe. What we're seeing in Europe is maybe not as significant resignations, but we have seen it being described as not the Great Resignation, but a major or the Great Reconsideration of work, if you like. And we know employees are becoming more focused on things like flexibility, belonging, purpose, all that good stuff. So first question to you, Martina, is anecdotally, or maybe what are you experiencing in Scandinavia or Europe? Are you feeling the Great Resignation, or do you think it's more a Great Reconsideration?
Well, absolutely, and just as you say, the numbers aren't that high. Maybe I'm thinking that this is, of course, part of the pandemic. You don't want people or managers to tell you what to do anymore. You want the freedom to do a little bit more as you find best. And from my perspective, I think that's quite a few countries in Europe. We are maybe not have the same hierarchy as US companies, which makes it maybe not the same big numbers, but still it's something that is really happening.
And what are you experiencing now, be it from PepTalk clients or in some of the leadership groups you're in across the world? How is it manifesting for those people?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because, I think you're right. I think the Great Resignation may not be necessarily the title that covers it, but it's attrition. The companies are struggling with attrition. They're struggling with there's a different world of work. Obviously we were all forced to remote working across the world in an instant. And then there's this kind of drip feed back to the office, some are hybrid, some are staying remote. And people are starting to realize that I think employees have more power in these conversations. And I think one of the really interesting things that I've seen from the conversations I've had, and at first I thought this was, potentially an American issue. And myself and Martina are sitting on a panel with a woman called Audrey Kabanecki in America, who hosts a platform called Amplify Voices. And we've been looking at the Great Resignation, and we're running a series of events addressing this over the coming months. And what we found was, by bringing in, basically what we're doing is we're bringing in podcast hosts from an array of different countries, all business podcasts, to come in and talk about what they're finding in their locations. And we found that we had people in Egypt, in South Africa, in New Zealand, and Sweden, and over here, and everybody's facing the same thing. And the big thing is, I think you touched on it there when you talked about the motivators for people changing jobs. And what's really interesting, Gallup did a lovely study where they spoke to managers and spoke to people, and basically asked them both the same question about why they felt the employee was changing job. And the number one answer managers gave was more money. But what we can see is that more money is actually down the list of priorities, and that the main reason that employees have given in that Gallup poll, and other studies are starting to back that up, the main reason they're giving is their relationship with their managers. And if relationships are important, and Martina, I know this is something that you're passionate about in your role as CEO, is about relationships you have with your people. And I think it's making companies think a little bit more about, how do we address attrition? How do we create an environment where our people are actually getting what they need to be at their best? And I think that's a challenge. I think there's a whole shift away from traditional ways of work and traditional ways of having manager-employee relationships. But I think it's a really interesting one and a very healthy one.
Just while you're saying that,
can I just comment on that one?
Yes, yeah, go for it, Martina.
It's just interesting what you're saying, Niall, the reasons why people leave. Then I just I have to comment that I think that that statistics that the reason why employees are leaving are a number of reasons, and the top one is that it's bad leadership, while the companies thinks that it's because of a higher salary. I think if you're leaving a bad manager, it's as you always want to be a good leaver, and then of course it's difficult to say that, okay, I'm leaving because of bad management. Just so I think that is something that you should bear in mind when you look at those statistics. But of course, then you can also maybe a bad manager. It's I guess when you are most likely not aware of it. So it's a complex question.
Yeah, there's layers. All right, I totally get that. You don't want to be the bad leaver, and slam the door behind you on the way out. You want to leave gracefully, I know you're quite fond of this bit of research, Niall, but it kind of speaks exactly to that. I know this might be a little bit faded for the screen, but it's basically asking, so do employers fully understand why employees leave? And the kind of light blue areas are the employees' views and why they leave. And at the top, it's valued by the organization, valued by the manager, sense of belonging, those kind of softer skill type things that maybe the organization might totally undervalue. And the employer views is like, oh, they were poached by another company, or they didn't have the development opportunities, or it's the working remotely piece. So yeah, I think there's a huge disconnect between what's driving this and what's actually happening. And to your point, Martina, it could be a whole lot worse, because maybe people are being quite guarded on the way out and not giving the full sense of how difficult it was.
To be honest, in my experience, I think you rarely get in in a kind of a HR exit meeting, you rarely get the real reasons why somebody's leaving. Which maybe will change now with the change in relationships, and as managers and employees become better at communicating with each other, maybe you won't need a HR exit meeting to understand why somebody's upset. And also like the challenges around, you know, the level of anxiety in the world right now. I mean, our reward for coming out of a 2-year pandemic is, you know, a potential world war. You know, there's huge pressures, and that doesn't even go into the day-to-day pressures people are facing in their lives. And as employers and as leaders, you know, we have to consider those things. And sometimes if you've got somebody who's usually a very high performer and their performance drops off a cliff, or they become, you know, remote from the people they're working with, or they're not engaged in the way they used to be, or they're cranky, or they're not delivering the performance they used to, or whatever. Like, what companies normally do is you go, oh, well, that person's performance is bad, we're going to performance manage them. And maybe what's going on is there's an actual mental health issue, or a stress, or an anxiety, that a conversation might actually help and change and give them the opportunity to engage with the company in a different way and come back into the fold and and regain their form, I suppose, as opposed to just ignoring all the things that are going on in the world and all the things that could be going on in someone's life and just going, well, they're not doing their job and I'm really frustrated with them. You know, because the one thing I find really interesting in the stats, Gus, that we were looking at there from the McKinsey report, it talks about the cost to the organization of replacing someone. You know, and there's a financial cost. You know, it costs you about 50% of their salary to bring someone new in and, you know, do the whole recruitment process and hire them and train them. But there's an emotional cost too. There could be like really close relationships in a team with one person who's then gone from the team, and all that team then are left with a hole that needs to be filled. And we so rarely think about that in companies. And it's something that I would have seen in sport, that kind of thing about, you know, if you've got a player who's like your 1 in a million player and he's out injured, how do you fill that hole? How do you bring the other people together? Or if, you know, the captain retires, there's a gap left. Now, you know, in the right environment, there's an opportunity for somebody else to fill that role. And that's what will happen naturally. But we can help facilitate that by being aware of what the issues are.
And Martina, I just wanted to ask you, I know you're, as CEO of Triggy, you're quite keen on putting people before process. So could you give us just a few insights into how you do that, or how your company goes about playing that out?
Well, I would say like all these issues, it's all about the culture in the company, and that's, I think, is a big part of this as well. Like, one manager, of course, you can make a big difference, but if you're in a larger organization where or a smaller one, of course, as well, where there is another or different kind of culture, it's really difficult as a manager to affect that. It's not just one manager, but coming back to the question of Triggy, I adore the culture of Triggy, and it was I started 1.5 years ago, and it was founded by 3 guys, and they had just founded the company based on their values in life. Like, everyone should be part of the success, so everyone is warrant holder of the company, and it's okay, I'm one manager and then I have a CTO, and that's all the managers that we have. and we believe in an open language, and everyone should be involved in all the decisions. I don't see it as my role to make decisions of the company. I like it when we are making decisions together, because everyone is a specialist in their area, and many years ago the managers were the ones that maybe had the highest education and the longest experience, but that's not the case nowadays. We have specialists in all areas, and if you want to have the best decisions of the companies, I think that it's good when you make them together. Then, of course, once in a while, I have to step in, or the board have to step in, and of course, like decisions on a higher level. But in the daily business, but also larger decisions on how to do things, we try to do that together. So that's how we're working at Triggy, and also the respect for people, that they should get not only their working life being the most efficient they can be, but also that they can be that they like their full life, because that's extremely important to be able to deliver well at work, that you feel like you're delivering well at home as well.
And do you think, like, a lot of how we got to where we are at the moment with remote work and hybrid and the great reconsideration, if not resignation, a lot of it has to do with the enforced lockdowns and stay-at-home orders. Do you think, would we have ever got to this evolution without the pandemic, if you like? Like, would we ever have got to the stage where, instead of it being one day a month and a luxury, that work from home would be as prevalent as it is today? Like, would it have taken a global pandemic, or do you think we would have got there over the next couple of years?
Good question. I think that maybe we would. It's just that it would have taken a much longer time. It's like when these kind of big things happen, then we have to adjust really quickly. So when of course the pandemic hit, all the companies have to adjust, and those who couldn't adjust, that hadn't adopted their way of working, but also their products and so forth, they went into bankruptcy kind of quickly, which is something that we really saw here in Europe. So
yeah. And now, what do you think? Do you think we would have got here ever, or would it have taken it years, or do you think we were on that kind of flight path towards more flexible working?
I think there's a natural evolution in society, and I think the newer generation coming through wouldn't accept a lot of the working environments that we put up with when we came out of college and started working. So I think, that there's potentially we might have got there, but I think there's, and what does getting there mean? It's like there's a real opportunity for something really, really huge to happen in the business world and in relationships. And I actually think, like, one of the things I think about when we talk about like attrition or resignation or whatever the case may be, is that it's I always think of the phrase that the Chinese have the same symbol for crisis as opportunity. And like, if there's a great resignation, that means there's a massive pool of hiring. Like there's great talent out there at the moment. So it's a great, it could be that the company who understand the great attraction are the company that are going to make the most benefit out of this. Because, if people are leaving an organization for specific reasons, they're going to be much more insistent on finding something different in the next place they go. So now employers have to kind of satisfy these people with what kind of role. So it's almost like the employee is interviewing the employer. But it's a really interesting time. And Martina, I don't know if you've noticed a lot of talent on the market at the moment for roles that you guys are filling.
Absolutely. It's the pandemic was a perfect timing for us to recruit, because it was all of a sudden much easier, especially people leaving large organizations. So it was much easier being a startup with a more flexible, open-minded culture to recruit people. And of course, also as a startup, we cannot have the highest salaries on the market. That's for the biggest companies. And so we have to attract our employees with different values instead.
And something you said earlier, Martina, about how it's, in the old days, it used to be about, or maybe the upper echelons of a company were the most educated, they're the most experienced, but now it's all about job specialization. And I think the remote factor has really opened that up. So, in let's say just in Ireland, it comes down to, well, where did you go to school? Where did you go to university? Where have you worked before? But when it's an open, global, remote source of talent, it now just comes down to, well, can you do that job, and how specialist are you at that job? And then it doesn't really, not that it doesn't matter about education or experience, but it's less so. It's more about, can you do that job and can you do it to a really high standard? Last question I just want to throw around before we wrap it up is, so the resignation, or at least the reconsideration, is here. We know it's real. We know it's impacting employers in a significant way. We know why. It's about purpose and it's about flexibility and people wanting a better work-life balance. So the last question I'd like to throw around is, so what can employers do about it? What is the best way to tackle it? Or what are the stuff that we can help people feel more human in their work on a day-to-day basis? I'll throw it to you, Martina, first.
Well, I have to come back to culture once again, and also be like the values that you have, really be sure that you walk the talk. And I think that's one of the parts behind the Great Resignation, that the pandemic has made it really obvious how you as a company live your values. So you have to work on that culture, and the managers are, of course, the bearers of the culture, if they walk the talk or not. So that would be my advice.
Cool. And now?
Yeah, I just think there's a really interesting kind of conversation around how you educate your leaders, and you look at what's going on in the world right now, and the incredible positivity towards the Ukrainian president at the moment, and he's been held up as this extraordinary example of leadership, and why? It's because he's communicating. He's been seen. He's standing his ground. He's been, he's shown that he's got authenticity and integrity, and he's actually communicating and being vulnerable. And these are all words that get trotted around, and all like companies all have values written all over their walls and stuff now. And for me, if there was one message from that, I mean, I'm not somebody who would always champion like military leaders as great leaders, because I don't agree with this top down, do as I say, I have all the wisdom kind of thing. But what I do think marks him out at the moment as somebody that people can relate to. Is that the values you would see on the wall in a company are the actions he's doing. And it's how you action out your behaviors that dictate whether you can ever be taken seriously as a leader. And I think that's what, to me, that is the big thing for companies to understand is, yes, values are important. Of course they are. And doing a lot of work around having your values and having them visible and all that is great. But it's how are you actioning them and how are you measuring them? It's one great thing about sport that I've learned over the years is that, sport is a much easier environment to measure success or to measure movement on an issue. It's much harder in the business world, but you could still measure success by taking time once a week to check in and go, how are we doing with our values? And how did my behavior there make you feel here? And maybe there's something to be learned from that, and it's something where we all kind of probably could do with being a little bit more vulnerable in our meetings,
So in summary, a good culture and strong leadership, and probably both of those two work well together. Like if you have a strong culture, you will get good leaders out of it, and equally good leaders will create a strong culture within a company. The last thing I just want to reference is one of our recent blog posts actually deals with this specific topic. It's about how managers can impact attrition, and the main takeaway is the 5 strategies to help managers reduce attrition. Things like, and they may seem so simple, but they are proven to be quite effective. It's connecting regularly with your team, leading with empathy, advocating for your people, regular feedback, and recognition and daily encouragement. So what I'm going to do is package up all the resources that we've talked about in the live stream today. I'm going to pop a link to this form in the comment underneath the live stream and any kind of post we share of a replay of the live stream. So if you put in your details, you will get all the resources we've covered today. So on that note, I will thank Martina Akerlund all the way from Sweden for joining us. It's getting dark in the evening there in Sweden, so I'll thank you for your time and your brilliant insights today. I'll thank Niall O'Carroll, Chief of Global Partnerships at PepTalk. And I've been Gus Ryan, Head of Marketing at PepTalk. Thanks a million for watching our live stream. See you next week.
Next Thursday.
See you. Thank you.
Bye.